Hey everyone, welcome to another great episode of Content Conversation. We're excited to be welcoming Nick Eubanks here, CEO of From the Future and partner in Traffic Think Tank, a great community for SEOs, marketers alike. And today we're going to be talking about keyword research in 2020 and beyond. Welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, from a keyword research standpoint, I do think this is one of the areas that I think really has changed more than other areas of SEO recently, or at least from my opinion. So I'm curious, like today into 2020 and beyond, like what are you doing differently that maybe you weren't doing 3 or 4 years ago from keyword research standpoint?
No, totally. So like the big shift, right, with like the knowledge graph now and like entities becoming like people paying a lot more attention to like the way that like entities are established and sort of all of the topicality that goes into like what makes an entity and what does that represent from a topical universe standpoint, just means that we're focusing like way more on categorization.
Okay.
I think the process for categorizing keywords has become a lot more granular. What's cool about it is the amount of like the ML and like NLP tools that are allowing to automate a ton of this now. A lot of the guys, folks in Traffic Think Tank have started to automate a lot of this in Sheets, even like pulling in like Python libraries and pulling in a bunch of like open GitHub laboratories to automate the categorization at scale, because it's the most manual process.
Okay.
So that's super exciting.
So when you say tools and sheets and things like that, and I heard you mention this in your talk here at Ungagged yesterday. You mentioned ClearScope. I don't know if you have like a go-to tool there you recommend people using, or what?
I love ClearScope.
Yeah.
It's funny that Bernard one of the founders, talks about it as a glorified TF-IDF tool, and TF-IDF gets a really bad rap. You've got people out there who
haters, for sure,
who are academics who are like, this is no impact on SEO. This is not how this works. This is super primitive. But at the end of the day, it's still a process for doing text extraction and organization of large corpuses or corpi of text. Mm-hmm. That's what it was created for. It's still super useful for that. So if you need to like rip through a site that's a couple thousand pages and categorize it on keywords to figure out, hey, how can we group these pages and make them more representative of the topics we're trying to go after? It's still a super useful tool.
So, I mean, with those kind of TF-IDF tools and things like that, are there any verticals that you see that being more useful in, or do you use this regardless, or like, is it everyday tool for you, or how do you use it?
It's definitely an everyday, it's used every day within the agency. A lot of our folks who are more on the editorial side or managing content strategy, they'll use it as a system of checks and balances, and they'll bring writers into it to try to shortcut that learning curve a little bit.
Okay.
In terms of verticals, we almost always start there. There's definitely somewhere it's not super helpful. Something that's sort of odd, I think, or where it is helpful that's sort of funny in terms of something you might not expect. I don't think we expected is when we work with a lot of software companies. So when we're writing, when we have writers writing pieces around software features and functions, more times than not, even if they are technical experts, subject matter experts that are writing about these things, we'll bring it into ClearScope, and ClearScope is like, hey, the average writing level here, it needs to be like 11th or 12th grade, as opposed to a college level or like a professor level. Mm-hmm. So we need to let the writers know, hey, you actually have to like
simplify.
Simplify this to be a broader audience.
Okay.
That's what Google is. That's the nice part. One of my favorite parts about ClearScope, because ClearScope is using Google and analyzing it from the perspective of like, here's what's working currently. So here's about where you should be.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we're using it, one of the things we found is like in lifestyle markets, we generally hit this A+, like the tool for anyone who doesn't use it gives you a score or a grade in terms of how optimized it is. And we've hit those levels without necessarily having to use the tool, I've noticed. But in like more technical markets and some of the complex ones that you're talking about, that's where it's added the most value for our trained team. But it makes a ton of sense for your process, and I'm sure a lot of people's process where they use freelance writers. Yep. This is like a great shortcut for that context. So yeah.
Have you guys hit the Illusive A++?
No, I didn't know that. That's the thing.
That's the thing.
Okay, nice. The A++. Is that you just put it live and you're just ranking number one?
No.
Nice.
Something actually, just to follow on that real quick. This is a very generalized statement, but we've sort of found that content, when you really hit content out of the park from like a nailing the topic perspective and matching the intent, content more times than not can be enough and there's obviously always going to be exceptions, but content alone can be enough to get you to page one, and then it's link building to go up from there, right? So,
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of people are willing to believe that. Or they think like we need to start link building. Like this is just way too competitive. It's too saturated. The players are too entrenched. We need link building right away to even try to crack page one. Whereas we had a brand new page we published for a client a couple of months ago and pushed it out. No link building. Site was established, getting a lot of traffic. Was in the wheelhouse, had a lot of relevancy, and hit position 11 without a single link for personal loans.
Wow. Okay. Nice.
So content's the hard part.
Yeah. In your presentation yesterday, off a spin off of that, I think you mentioned one of the things that I thought was interesting was and maybe you could speak to it, is like you noticed a trend around sentiment on certain keyword types that you found useful. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So MonkeyLearn's got a really cool sentiment analysis, and they've got a nice API. MonkeyLearn lowers the barrier just in general for I think anybody who's trying to get into text extraction. You can build and train models pretty quickly with pretty small data sets, 20, 30 sentences or fragments to train models for the way that you want text tagged or organized. They have a sentiment analysis tool, and a trend that we've seen, especially in the personal finance space, is that queries that represent like best modified queries where the user intent is to see a list of options. Google wants that content to be presented in a way that's objective. They seem to reward that tone and that style.
Makes sense.
And so objective is actually often represented as having a negative sentiment. Because a lot of the words that would push sentiment from negative to positive, like they might think the word best, but that's not actually necessarily potentially a positive sentiment. Whereas much as like talking about how good or great or joyful, like all of these words
amazing.
all of these words that would take something from being objective to subjective, aren't going to be there in a negative, like a sentiment analysis score that's represented as negative.
So in that context, that makes total sense. I wonder, it's interesting, like I always recommend to clients, if they're a first party, they rarely could rank for like best personal loans.
Yep.
So is that application, you've actually seen a first party being able to do something like that? Or is it just more that trend difference that
No, the first party can do it, but it's not like this is what I was talking about yesterday. It's not going to be their product page. They would love for their product page to rank for best personal loans. It's never going to.
Right.
And the only way they're going to match the content type with the informational page, like a blog post rank for that, is they're going to have to link to their competitors. It's like that's what the users want, so that's what Google wants. So and a lot of companies aren't willing to do that. This is why you're seeing this big trend in microsites, as Kevin Indig has also been talking about. Recently.
So one thing you talk about a lot that I really like is the idea of the total addressable market, or the TAM. I know you get passionate for that. So I'd love to hear you define that, how you talk through how you use that from a keyword research standpoint.
This was definitely very much. So it started as the keyword matrix, which was I needed a name for it back then. Has grown into this sort of much larger beast, which we use to help try to define markets, identify opportunities within markets. It's really cool for emerging markets, but it's also can be really valuable for more established markets where you have a client, let's say, that is getting a few 100,000 visits a month. They've got a nice keyword profile, 40, 50,000 keywords that they're already ranking for, and the focus is oftentimes on where can we make the quick wins, how can we move rankings and traffic up for their existing keywords.
Right.
But you might come to a point where you sort of run into a glass ceiling and it's like, all right, it's time to expand this footprint. What other relevant terms are there sort of in this universe? And the easiest way to get there is to go scrape everybody that's ranking for all the keywords that they're already ranked, so all the SERPs that they're already on, go scrape all the rest of the URLs that are ranking on the same SERPs, go pull down their entire keyword footprints and essentially run a diff file to figure out where are these competitors who also have relevant products or sort of in our wheelhouse from a search ranking perspective. Where do they have additional rankings that we don't? So it's really all using the competitive landscape to map out this like larger footprint and figure out what's my market share within this now. So like we have a 10 or 20% market share of this total universe. So here's the remaining items within the universe that we're not targeting at all, maybe you aren't even aware of.
Gotcha.
And where that's changed a bunch is so the keyword matrix was based on the idea of just scraping the first page of Google. So taking those up to 10 URLs, pulling in all the meta attributes, and then going to each of those pages with the scraper tech, which Term Explorer is still really good for, and scraping the content on the page. It removes the header, the footer, the sidebars, main navigation, and just lets you know, like, here's the rough word count of the content on this page. We moved from 10 to 20, and then more recently we've actually started to, since Ahrefs now supports 100 result export out of their tool, we've started moving to the actual 100 pack, not because we're going to get great relevant content information for content requirements and for ranking requirements, but we found that a lot of times if we want to go after finding domains to pick up like domains that have been neglected, forgotten about, or have chunks of rankings or content that is just not good enough to perform, that we want to potentially pick up for the link profiles, it's a good way of identifying.
Okay. Yeah, so I know you've done a good amount of that. Could you speak to more of your process of like buying domains, how people can leverage that? What are some examples of how you've used that, or one or two?
So Ian Howes is who got me really into buying domains.
Okay.
I think he's relatively obsessed with it,
Okay.
Which is why he does the weekly export of all the current auctions in the domains channel and Traffic Think Tank every week.
Oh, all right.
And I've picked a lot of my process is from the way that he looks at and evaluates domains. So like minimum CF and TF for Majestic of like 10 or 12 with like an 80% ratio in either direction. Minimum domain rating on Ahrefs of say 20.
Okay.
Ideally, they had at least 500 organic traffic of 500 plus, which you can use the SEMrush API for, since Ahrefs doesn't have a keyword API, but they really should. But I bugged about that a lot.
Yeah.
So we'll look for essentially just a clean link profile as much as possible, and we'll do evaluation for what we should pay for an expired domain or an auction domain based on how much time and money would it take to recreate that link profile.
Okay.
And then my favorite thing to do is just to download the site from archive.org as much as possible, as many pages as possible.
Okay.
Stand the site back up and let it go. We'll just leave it there for a couple months until the impression and growth sort of stagnates in GSC.
Okay.
And then that's sort of your baseline. At least for the way that we do it. And at that point, then we can figure out like, all right, do we want to move this content and these rankings and these links over to another site, or do we want to leave this site up as is and now go do keyword research, go build a TAM for this market and figure out what our content strategy is going to be like for growth.
How, from a redirect standpoint, how you're seeing that operate today? Like I've seen people, would you ever just redirect that domain into a new domain without moving
just the
content?
whole thing over?
Yeah.
No way. So there's two ways that we're doing it. So if there's content that's already on there that's immediately relevant to the destination site, we might move some pages over.
Okay.
But we always want to move like individual pages over to sort of test that domain, test like what that link equity transfer is going to be like. Google's super fickle.
Yeah.
And then there are instances where there may be pages that are sort of in the topical universe, but they're not relevant for the topic that the site that we want them to move over to are at.
Yeah.
So we'll change the content on the page of the resurrected site, change the topicality of it. That's all measured via the impression growth, like the shift in impressions back in GSC. And once we're seeing that topicality shift, then we'll move the content over.
Okay, that makes sense. So there's a lot of risk in there.
And Barbie actually spoke to a really interesting experience where he had moved over all the internal pages into HubSpot from a domain that they had picked up. And when he moved the home page over, he saw like a 20 or 30% drop in the organic traffic to that section of the HubSpot site that he moved over. So he stood the home page back up and instead just added a link. And all the traffic came back and continued to grow.
Okay.
So he ended up, like, even to this day, like it's been, I think, over a year, like there's a domain that he had bought where he moved hundreds of pages over and transferred all that link equity over. But the homepage of that site is still up with a link to the category on HubSpot. That's like, Google's weird, man.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to have. Is like homepages are often, they get the most links on average, I would say, and that is like probably one of the weirder pages to technically move the content for, right? So like, how would you normally do that kind of thing?
So I'm working on a project right now where we're using the expired domain strategy. So it's a very competitive space. Everybody seems to be in it, and people putting a lot of time and money and effort into this space because it's very lucrative and it's growing very fast. So we got a clean domain, not an expired domain, just a topically focused domain that could be an actual brand. And then also sprinted to get to like 50,000 words of index content on the domain to show Google, hey, like this is the topical representation that we're looking for.
Okay.
And then we're buying domains that are relevant for the categories of content, and we're moving them over and we're folding in those homepages. So those homepages are getting redirected from the old domains into the category URLs of the new site.
So it's almost like a hub page that sort of could have the same topical.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we're buying domains that specifically were relevant to the categories on the new site.
Gotcha.
Standing them back up, letting them get recrawled and indexed, making sure they're not penalized or anything like that. And then when we move the content over, we'll move some content over directly. We'll refresh some content to change the topical focus before we move it over. And then ultimately, the last move is to redirect that home page into the category page.
How much from domain buying or what you've heard of this is the process like? reaching out to people that are floating in those like pages 2 to 10 versus active auctions of I'm just trying to get rid of this site kind of thing?
Auctions are always going to be the easiest. The problem is you might pay like
more.
You're either bidding against a business owner that didn't mean to let the site expire, and they're going to be the most expensive to bid against, or you're bidding against other SEOs that want to do exactly what you're trying to do. And they can just get really expensive, like a link profile, a domain with a really nice, super topically relevant link profile of say 1,000 like LRDs, like that's going to probably go for 20 grand, 20, 30 grand, just for the domain.
But that makes sense, right?
Based on link acquisition cost, right?
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah, so it's just
and time to get all those links.
You're doing math of the 20K against the 1,000 linking root domains.
Yeah, so you figure, if on average it's going to cost me like in time, effort, labor, $200 to $300 to land each root domain, if I can get root domains for sub $100 and shortcut my time. It makes economic sense.
Do you feel like there's any? I mean, I know Google has said redirects apparently are 1-to-1 now, 3-to-1s. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you have an opinion on this, but like, is there any dilution on that number?
We definitely see dilution.
Yeah.
But it's not like everybody wants to know, like, well, what's the percentage?
Who
knows?
Yeah.
I had breakfast this morning with some clients here, and they had recently done a redirect for something in like the health and wellness and like a mental wellness space. And so the domain that they had been writing on it and like blogging on was a DR of 1. The domain they moved over was a DR of 25. And then the DR, since the full move over, is now 25. So literally 24 plus 1. Like, I've never seen that happen before. And they were like, "Can we expect this?" I was like, I've never seen that happen. Like, I don't know why that happened or how that happened, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Okay, nice. So I imagine, do you have any advice for someone who's like doing that for the first time? I imagine there's generally nervousness of I'm buying a new domain, right?
For $20,000.
Yeah. I don't
hire somebody who's done it before.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned Ian does that. If anyone,
Ian does. There's a lot of people in the TTT group that I mean, the strategy. It may not work for much longer after this video comes out, but it still works for right now. So we can keep doing it.
I mean, it makes sense. I think that's the same procedure that a real business would do. The same thing, and that's
that
why
buys other businesses.
Right.
So, in a previous life, I had been doing consulting for Thomson Reuters, and they were out buying a lot of healthcare tech companies. And it had nothing to do with SEO. Like when they buy a company, they just redirect that whole site, all the content, everything, just into their homepage, and they just add, and they do it with like 5-second JS, like a JavaScript delay, to let people know like this site has been acquired by Thomson Reuters. And so like it's very like. It's the natural currency of the internet for business. So
yeah, I mean, if you're moving the content over, and I think the topical authority makes sense. Like that would be something I think Google would want to value, honestly. So circling back to the TAM, you mentioned I think one application of people that are on existing sites use that. Like, how are some ways clients are coming to you and requesting this kind of activity? I'm curious there.
What we're seeing a lot more of now than we have in the past is clients looking for essentially a data warehouse of keyword opportunities that they want to be maintained and refreshed. And a lot of what they come to us for is opportunity identification. They're like, hey, here's the business now. Here's where we know we're weak. We don't know what we don't know in terms of other opportunities, which is why they might want to TAM in the first place. Or they do know about opportunities and they're like, hey, we don't know how much time or money it's going to take for us to get these rankings or this traffic. Like, can you help us prioritize the opportunities that we believe in? And so a lot of that can be done with relatively empirical data, which is the best part about keyword data, right? Because especially at scale, it's an objective look at an industry. And you can figure like, who are the players, who are my competitors? And you might have different competitors for different modifiers, different competitors for different products, like within the same space, and identifying where are there pockets of weakness or opportunities to exploit, and all of that can be managed in something like a BigQuery database with a Tableau, Clipfolio, or Data Studio dashboard slapped on in front, and just refreshed every few months.
Nice, that's smart. Going back to my first question about like things that have changed, you talked about categorization. Like, how is that different from like a hub and spoke model or thing like that? How are those different mindsets, or are they potentially?
I think it's a way to do the hub and spoke model without having to make one of your analysts suffer for like 10 hours and manually select all the categorization, but you still have to set the categories, right? Like, and for the
Okay.
most part, so you can have there's really cool NLP models out there like Latin dialect allocation (LDA).
Okay.
It's like a progression. It's a regressive model that's a progression of essentially what TF-IDF was. But what that'll do is that'll look at an entire corpus of information. So you could feed in like, here's this keyword. Go scrape the top 100 pages on Google and just show me the top 10 topics that are represented across that entire corpus. And it'll give you the topic names. And those topics can usually become, like that might be a topic that you're like, all right, that should be a hub. So like we're gonna call that a hub. So anything that's representative of that topic, when this script in Sheets rips through this entire set of pages, score that, like categorize that as this topic.
Okay.
But it still all fits into that hub and spoke sort of model in some way. The separation though is now we're having these tools tell us what the topics are, as opposed to us being like, oh, we like a human reading this and being like, this is the topic that this is about.
Okay. Just automating the process more so. Okay, that makes sense. So from a keyword research, I mean, another thing that I think has changed, at least from our process from today to a few years ago, is quick answers, trying to optimize for that. I mean, I guess it's more SERP analysis to a degree. There's new features that we're now optimizing for, thinking about in terms of media format and things like that. That kind of segues or connects to the idea of there's more zero-click searches and Google's eating more traffic. Like, how is that factoring into your thought process? If I'm sure it is, but if at all, I was gonna say.
So we've shifted. We've really moved away from looking at search volume, and we pay much closer attention to estimated clicks per search, which again, really wish Ahrefs would take, because they do a pretty good job, I think, with that estimation. But it would be really cool if they could put that into an API.
That's a takeaway from. Yeah, I mean, we're similar. We're doing that now. We're optimizing for clicks instead of searches. For sure. One of the things we've realized, or I mean, I even kind of realized that someone on our team gave us feedback on. I was like, someone said, you should rank like on what is type keywords that have low click volume normally or at least in terms of the ratio to search volume to click volume. I was kind of nudging them away from actually going after some of those because the click volume is so low, but then realized there's also high link intent to some definitional type queries as well. So there's like this balance of link intent plus click intent. I mean, there's so many things we kind of got.
That's a brilliant consideration, though, right? Like even just the idea of, hey, this may not result in a lot of traffic, but this could be a great passive source for link acquisition. I mean, that would probably be enough justification to go after.
Yeah, I mean, they make sense, and as you went back to, a lot of times it's not we don't want to do this. It's more prioritization. It's like I think that's what click volume has often changed, or those click data is like, just should we do this first? But I mean, I think it's interesting from that TAM analysis is like, what is that content? It must be a really efficient company. I find a lot of people are like, it's more that we could go after all these things. We just don't have the resources to go after all these things. So it almost seems like this is a really effective company to be able to actually capture all this TAM and move really aggressively. Or maybe it's a small enough company that they need to get every single small pocket of that.
It's been more about even just the past like year, we're seeing more and more companies come to us and that want something like this, and they ask as part of it, like, hey, can you forecast? Like, here's our metrics, here's our number, like this is our CPA, our conversion rate, our average order value, our lifetime value. Can you fit the? Can you take a model where you're able to back into an estimated number of clicks or traffic for these terms, and based on using a very conservative conversion rate, whatever that might be, whatever that conversion event is, and actually create a model to let us see like what could this look like in terms of actual ROI, like real, like backing SEO into revenue. One thing that I wanted to get a chance to ask you about is, you spoke yesterday about this metric that Siege is using, which was links per view, and I've never heard anybody talk about that before, and I just think that's a brilliant concept. How do you guys measure that, if you don't mind me asking? Like, how do you actually try to estimate what that is?
I mean, honestly, it's kind of, I mean, there's definitely certain types of, just to like back up, one of the things we notice is there's some search volume, there's some topics that there's only like 200 searches for, but you go to search results and there's like 50 plus links for those results.
Got it. Okay, so you got it.
So yeah, it's more like the ratio, like it's normally low search volume, but you go to search results and you tell there's a lot of links, and these people most certainly aren't doing manual link building, or at least you can kind of tell by the content type, like if it's a government site or maybe a third party, something like that's kind of walked into those results. So that's kind of more the thought process. We don't necessarily like put into a spreadsheet necessarily. It's more, I do think there's only a finite number of those in each market. So we're not lucky enough to be able to just dump a ton, but you probably actually could do that because it gets more interesting, I think, for a lot of sites to not just do that top 5 of like, this will get 200 to 400 links, but rather those ones that I think you touched on a few in your presentation of like, this could get 20 passive links maybe over a year, but that compounds if you're doing 20 of those.
Yeah.
So that's a great outcome. And I think, kind of think Google wants to reward too. But yeah, that's kind of, I think that's one way we've been thinking about keyword research for sure as well. But in terms of like, I guess one other thing I'm curious from a keyword research standpoint, are you doing anything for voice search? Are you thinking about that at all? No.
No, the considerations for podcast as a link building strategy and as just a marketing channel in and of itself is become a pretty big consideration.
Okay.
Barbie actually just pushed out a new tool called Scapegoat that you can put iTunes URLs in, and it'll actually go and find the email address that's attached to them, which you have to like dig through audio. Like it's there, but like it's a whole big convoluted process to get to them. So Scapegoat does it for you.
Okay.
Which
Cool.
is pretty slick. But outside of that, that's about as much voice stuff as I think we at least care about right now.
Yeah, I mean, pretty similar. I hear people talking about it. There's always like the new
thing. Latest shiny
Yeah,
object.
yeah. I mean, if we were optimizing for quick answers, to me, you kind of do that, but it doesn't seem that interesting as of today. But so you threw out a ton of tools even already, but are like maybe some core ones that you think are the go-tos from keyword research standpoint. What are those for you?
So I think a really underrated tool is actually Keyword Keg.
Okay, I haven't heard of that.
So the guys behind
Keg.
Okay. Like
Drink.
Yeah. So the guys behind Keywords Everywhere.
Okay.
Keywords Everywhere was their free extension to build a lot of awareness around Keyword Keg. But Keyword Keg is one of those where you can go and you can drop a seed keyword in, and you can filter by, hey, I only want data from Google or Bing, Amazon, eBay, all those other engines that they're able to scrape data from. But if you don't limit the results, I mean, it'll come back with like, cool, here's 400,000 keywords. And like not many other tools will. I mean, Ahrefs certainly can bring that volume at a certain level, but Keyword Keg is pretty fast, and they've got some computed metrics like power, which I think is how they report on like clicks or expected clicks.
Okay.
And for sort of top level spot checking, or if you just are trying to do a content strategy for like a smaller blog, like a personal project or something, it can be really effective because the list building functionality in there is actually pretty slick.
How expensive ballpark is that?
I think it's like $30
a month
or something.
Okay.
It's super low cost. It's just a keyword tag. It's not like an Ahrefs or an SEMrush. Like it's just for keywords.
Just that feature. So is that like the go-to? That's the one.
That's like if I want to
thing you haven't
spot check
mentioned?
stuff and like
Okay.
and I don't have the time or desire to go through like this whole process. That's a pretty easy way to get some insight.
I do notice a trend of things you're talking about, which I think is smart, of like, let's get all the freaking keyword data macro versus like, let's go micro and be like hacking at it versus let's capture the universe and prioritize appropriately. Do you like, it sounds like, I would guess with your client engagements, do you like force people, like we got to do the TAM before we do anything, or like
there's only one deliverable that we really force on people.
Okay.
And we're working on changing, I guess, what we call it. So the name of it came over from Webris. So Ryan had come up with the original version, which was called the Website Quality Audit.
Okay.
Which is sort of like a holistic look at like the SEO and like general like technical sort of health of the site.
Right.
But it's like a shallow dive in like all the areas as opposed to like a deep specific dive in any one of them. It's like we have a tech audit that is a much like deeper dive than what just a WQA would be.
Okay.
But the WQA is a pretty good starting place if we just need like a quick. It's like that's the hey, here's where
And there's keyword research in that?
There's keyword research in it,
Okay.
but it's just on like one site. It's not the competitive view. It's
Gotcha.
just like
Okay.
what are you currently doing that like you could. So if you have a client that's like, hey, I just want you to increase traffic like 10% as fast as possible. You're going to start. And you've said this before. Like you've spoken about like I'm going to start with rewriting title tags. Like it's the easiest win, quick win. So this is essentially like where are there opportunities to
quickly do that.
Rewrite some title tags, combine some pages, remove misplaced canonicals, which still happen all the time. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thought that I just had. I was like, what is that thing that, as an agency, you won't let them not pay you for to start an engagement, and that's for you. You force them, and then they.
That sort of flips over a bunch of other stones, and it's like, all right, here's all the things that like you could fix. So we would recommend you start with like this one first, and then this one, and here's what we think the impact will be. And that's where that usually leads into the forecast piece. It's like, well, all right, like how like they'll come to me and I need to sell this to our CFO. How like can you help us forecast this to actually get the approval for the budget needed to do all this work?
Okay, nice.
And that's where Barbie just shot a video recently on how to do forecasting for the C-suite. That was pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, for us, we do a brand discovery that our team eventually. We used to just be like, we're doing content month 1, and now we're do a brand discovery. That's not very expensive, but still lets us get to know them. We make content recommendations, stuff like that. It's one of those things where clients will always be like, I don't want to pay for that. I'm like, you have to pay for that.
We flexed on our process once this year. So like we were doing a design and development project for moving a consumer brand from the longer version like to the much shorter version domain because they were able to get their hands on it. And we talked about like our UX team was like, we really need to do the UX research and build our mood board and our pattern library before we present them any patterns that we would want to use for the design. And they were like, no, we don't want to pay for that. Like, here's our brand guidelines, like use that. And we skipped it and it
didn't go up.
It was one of those lessons that was learned. It's like, well, all right, we can never skip that again in a design and dev project. So.
Nice. Yeah, I do think you guys are one of the probably the only other agency I can think of that really values design well, which I respect a lot.
Well, I mean, you guys have a tremendous design team. We have 2 visual designers and 3 UX people, but design's taken pretty. I mean, it's table stakes now. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I love when you had mentioned yesterday how you gave the example. You're like, if a client comes to us with a site like this, and they're not willing to change it, like we won't work with them.
Yeah.
Because you know that it's going to impact, like just going to have a direct impact on the results.
Yeah, I mean, on the point, you said you have 3 UX designers. One of the things I was like, I thought about sharing it at some point. I'm like, almost like, I feel like the best SEO for company can be the UX designer sometimes.
Yeah. So our newest like sort of up and coming UX person, she was a technical SEO for 5 or 6 years beforehand, and she was like, I want to move over. Like I'm really interested in this, but I want to focus more on how it all comes together on the UX side.
Okay.
So she went to Ironhack in Miami, did a 3-month boot camp. She won at the Adobe Creative Jam like a couple weeks ago. Created this amazing site.
Nice.
And so like that was like the big level up. So we're like, well, you're on the UX team now. And then our head of UX is actually like a unicorn though. So he was a designer first, went to Ironhack in Miami, became a full stack developer. He's a tremendously good developer, but he's still like
still
UX
a good UX designer.
Yeah. So he wrote a post on our site about how to do a UX audit. His name is David Martin.
Okay.
He takes the creative design and all like literally full stack development, front end, back end, everything, and he's able to sort of wrap that all up into
Nice.
UX, which is awesome.
Yeah, another spin-off thought you gave me there was one of the things. I tried to push our team to do blog posts. It probably depends on the organization, but you could probably find some of the best content is not like people, unfortunately, like you and I. It's like that UX designer on our team that writes that one post. That's all their freaking meaty knowledge in that one thing.
Yes, 10 years of knowledge and experience are wrapped up in.
But people probably will overlook that because they're like, oh, it's not a voice or something like that. But maybe we should all go deep in the archives of all these agencies and find those people that you haven't heard say something.
The best content I think that I read every week is usually stuff that folks on our team have found that has nothing to do with our industry and have shared in Slack.
Yeah.
And it's usually it's just individual practitioners that have a very specific, focused competency, and they're way more fascinating things to say, I think, than any of the junk that people like us put out.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, we talk about the future or now and what we're doing from keyword research standpoint. I mean, I think to kind of like sum this up or just curious, obviously there's a lot of conversations we talked about sort of like searches, but like the future of search, Google eating clicks. What is your opinion of like, should SEO I mean, I guess to tie to keyword research, how that will change if at all? What are your thoughts about the future of search? Do you have any concerns? How are you thinking there?
The speed at which the technological landscape is changing is become. I mean, it's been known that technology is changing so fast, and 10 years in technology world is like 100 of what it used to be, and there's this compounding effect. But seeing how fast what a website is, like the advent of progressive web apps and where that's going, and like the idea of having native app features on web-based versions that are run from remote web services, like that is just changing so much. And I think the most representative thing with that is Google being like, hey, the mobile version of your site is now your site. Anything that's not when you're on the mobile first index, anything that's not on your mobile site doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's like a pretty strong signal that that's the direction that everything's going. And so I think we're going to find more and more as it's going to be more about. I think UX is going to continue to be like a major differentiating factor in the search side of things. I think there may be a point where entire sets of search results are going to be all shell architecture, where you're never actually leaving Google. It's not AMP though, but like you're in a native experience within your phone, but you're on a web app.
Okay.
It's essentially a website, and like the ability. Google's still not good with JavaScript. They've been claiming to be for years and years and years. But the move to the progressive web apps, where like client-side content actually can potentially be crawled and rendered and indexed, is going to just. I think we're going to see a lot of really cool experiences like be presented in the next 5 years.
Okay, nice. Yeah, one of the, I mean, you're touching on your point of UX. That's one thing I've been thinking about more recently that I didn't. Like the first 5 years of Siege or even 4, it was like, obviously let's go super heavy quality, but I do think UX design and like thinking just of like the economic model of high quality content and competing on that side is what allows a lot of sites to win. Like I see sites like NerdWallet and who's some other one? Student Loan Hero is one I often point out. Policy Genius does a good job of this, of just like their UX design allows them to put up a blog post really quickly, and it still looks really impressive because it's just in this elegantly designed, fast-loading design experience.
So what you're speaking to, I think, is the idea of a design system. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know what a design system was until David Martin was like, "Hey, we should build one of these."
Okay.
But essentially, the idea of a design system, and they're great for any brand that has a consumer-facing portal in addition to their website, where there might be multiple pieces of it. So breaking down every pattern into its components, coding those components for the languages that need to be supported. So our website, it's the HTML components for our design system for FTF for the website, but then all of our internal tools the front end is all in Vue.js. So our design system is the same components, but in HTML and Vue. And it's a code repository that maintains and standardizes all of it. And like that is absolutely, like IBM introduced the concept with Carbon was the name of their design system. This was like 4 or 5 years ago now. But like this is where everything's going. I mean, like it's a way to standardize that user experience, make it super clean and fast, and still create these web-first objects that are going to be friendly for search engines.
Nice. Yeah, this has been great, Nick. Appreciate you coming on. I think a lot of good stuff for people at home to take home and hopefully macro optimize their keyword research process. I do have to I check out Traffic Think Tank, great group, really a ton of great stuff in there. I'm sure anyone who's watching this is already aware of Traffic Think Tank, but it's great. I know they're working on a learning management system. It's going to have a lot of great content in there.
Next Thursday,
out.
I think it launches.
Oh, next Thursday. So this will hopefully be live by the time this goes. Knock on wood. It'll be live. So check that out. Check out From the Future. Nick is always probably number one mind on keyword research. So appreciate you coming on. And I need to give one plug. I do have this ugly mustache because it's Movember. Raising money for a great cause. So check out a link, which we'll put in the comments. Really appreciate even like $5-10 if you get any value to donate to a great cause to support men's health. So thanks for coming on, Nick.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Check out the video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and let us know what you thought in the comments. Thanks for watching.